మీకు బండ్లు ఉన్నాయి. Putih. Okay, phone dia kan lain ni, kemana dia nak ni? Switch off the phone, my phone. It will ring. Kemana dia nak ni?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome and Ayubowan and Vanakkam and Namaste. Thank you for joining our webinar series. And so this is our 7th webinar we are organizing under the title of the terrorism. Today, webinar theme, Democracy Under Threat, Incitement and Glorification of the LTTE Tamil Terrorism. Our total webinar is about 75 minutes and 1 hour, and it is roughly 1 hour and 15 minutes. We have 3 experts on the subject matter. Daya Gamage is joining with us from Las Vegas, USA. Dr. Mehmet Gazel is joining with us from Geneva, Switzerland. And Shamindra De Silva is joining with us from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Each panelist will provide analysis of their thoughts on the subject matter about 15 minutes. Then we'll answer specific questions about the issue, and it is about questions and answer session about 5 minutes. End of all the presentation, I will open the floor for the town hall session. If you did not submit your questions, you can submit now. So then there is a place on your Zoom platform, so you can submit it as questions and answers, then we answer. If you are submitting the question, please make sure to provide your email address, just in case we were not able to provide you your answer during the webinar. We may able to give you answers offline. And now I will open the opening remarks for this webinar. Today, our topic is democracy under threat, incitement and glorification of LTT Tamil terrorism. Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the LTTE Tamil terrorists, waged 26 years long ruthless campaign to create mono-ethnic state for Tamils in the north part of Sri Lanka. Suicide bombers are the hallmark of LTT terrorism. LTT invented suicide vest and deployed women suicide cadres for political assassination. LTT Tamil terrorists carried out 378 suicide attacks against the civilians and the civilians' objects that caused massive destruction. Tamil terrorists kill over their own Tamil politicians and intellectuals, academics, and massacred more than 3,000 innocent civilians living at the boundary villages, so-called de facto state of Tamil Eelam. LTT also recruited over 7,000 child soldiers. At the final stage of the armed conflict, Tamil terrorists used civilian as a human shield and fired point blank at the civilian trying to escape from the LTT clutches. There are facts to prove that the LTT remnants and groups align its terrorist ideology, Tamil Eelam, and active in the foreign countries, including Canada, working to incite violence and destabilize India and Sri Lanka. November 26th and 27th of each year, LTT remembers their death cadre. The event continued to be observed in Canada, LTT and their proxies, despite the LTT's military debacle in May 2009. Most importantly, LTT never mourned the loss of Tamils who belongs to the other militant movements. The sectarian LTT did not regard others as a fallen heroes. Only LTT cadre were given that recognition. Families of dead cadre belonging to the other movement were not allowed to mourn their loved one in publicly. They could mourn in private. LTT Tamil terrorists and their proxies organized an event November 26 and 27. That event managed to generate more funds by exploiting people's emotion and pledge for violent separatist agenda in Sri Lanka. These events are glorifying terrorism, and authorities must take action to ban such activities. When we look at in Canadian context, on the legal context, Anti-Terrorism Act 2015 was passed. The act created the new criminal code offense to criminalize the advocacy or promotion of commissions of the terrorism offenses in general. It is now criminal offense for a person by communicating statements to knowingly advocate or promote the commission of terrorism offenses in general, while knowing that any one of these offenses will be committed or being reckless as to whether any of these offenses may be committed as a result of such a communication. Then similar legislation has been passed in United Kingdom in Terrorism Act 2000. Section 12 created the 3 offenses: inviting support, arranging a meeting, and addressing a meeting of which the purpose is the encouraging of support for the proscribed organization. Now, denounce glorifying LTT terrorism. That is the most important factor. So what we are going to discuss today. But I want to mention today, I know that many Tamil youth, and they have used their Instagram accounts and Twitter account to provide the glorification of terrorism. These acts has to be stopped. And so basically what happened, you know, especially university students in Tamil diaspora, their parent doesn't want to get involved with any kind of this kind of activity. And so basically, we know what happened to the Botalu Suresh, and he has in trouble for his life and academic career. So therefore, we need to think about, you have to think about twice what you are doing. So this is the legislative measures now in Canada and United Kingdom. So now I will turn over this presentation to Daya Gamage. And Daya Gamage has technical issues, and he will be joining with us over the phone. And I will give the brief introduction about the Daya Gamage. Daya Gamage had a 25 years career at the United States Department of State, initially as a public affairs specialist, and the final 15 years of foreign service, national political specialist, worked at the US diplomatic mission in Sri Lanka as an investigative analyst, keen observer, and political interpreter of the separatist Elam War launched by the LTTE Tamil terrorists. During the volatile atmosphere in Sri Lanka, Gamage assisted Washington understand the ever-changing socio-political climate of Sri Lanka, which coincide with the US interest. His deep knowledge of the socio-economic political trajectory in Sri Lanka gave him an up-close understanding of disparities in the Sri Lankan society as a whole, the misinterpretation and diabolic misinformation of ethnic issues, and most importantly, the manner in which Sri Lankan issues were used by LTT propagandists within a Tamil diaspora in Western nations during the Elam War 4 and thereafter the tarnished image of Sri Lanka. Since his departure from the State Department, Mr. Gamage has been combating this diasporic Elam elements and global propaganda. He reads economics and political history at the University of Ceylon, Sri Lanka. May I invite Daya Gamage to the forum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hevage. Greetings to everyone. I'm Daya Gamage, addressing from the United States. Today, I'm presenting you the basics of international humanitarian law associated with the Geneva Convention, how it was applicable to the Tamil Tigers while they were engaged in ruthless terrorism, and most importantly, how some of the one-time LTT professionals who provided expert advice while the Elam War 4 was in progress and still freely living in Western nations and in Scandinavian region are culpable under the provisions of the Geneva Convention of providing material support to the armed non-state actor. Western nations led by the United States, since the defeat of the LTT in May 2009, have systematically sharpened their maneuvers to first strategically communicate to the rest of the world that the government of Sri Lanka was responsible for violating international humanitarian law, preparing the path to prosecute Sri Lankan leaders and military personnel. Why were the blatant terrorism, mass killings of innocent civilians, ethnic cleansing with brutality, and other atrocities committed by the Tamil Tigers since 1983 through 2009 ignored? The accepted belief was and is that if the state actor, meaning the legitimate government, in an internal conflict is a signatory to the international covenants of humanitarian law, that state actor needs to abide by the provisions ratified by the UN, and that any violation of international humanitarian law, the state actor bears culpability. In contrast, in a situation in which an armed non-state actor, in this case the Tamil Tigers, is not a signatory to the international covenants, the general belief is and was it has no obligation towards honoring or upholding the provisions. Further belief is it limits the culpability of those who provide material support to such non-state actors by way of expert advice, in this case, advice to the LTT leadership. My endeavor here is to highlight the provisions of the international humanitarian law are in fact applicable to armed non-state actors, and most importantly, to examine the applicability of the law to those who provided material support. in providing expert advice and related material support to the LTT, these elements in fact justified the Tiger outfit use of terrorism. One such person in New York is New York-based immigration attorney, Viswanathan Rudrakumaran, who associated with the LTT when it was engaged in violation of international humanitarian law, consistently providing expert advice to Prabhakaran and the leadership of the LTT when they were engaged in violent crimes to pursue their goal of a separate state in Sri Lanka. Contrary to the general belief, we have found that the provisions of the Geneva Convention cover the acts of armed non-state actors, such as the LTT, and those who associated with such acts in providing expert advice to such non-state actors. Rudrakumaran and many others who are freely living in Western countries fall within the definitions of the provisions of the Geneva Convention. And our endeavor is to make the Western nations knowledgeable, as they have conveniently turned a blind eye, that the Geneva Convention covers the acts of those individuals that facilitated the dastardly acts of the LTT, which too is within the jurisdiction of the Convention. We need to create a global awareness of this. I will investigate how the IHL provisions are applicable to the violent acts of Sri Lanka's Tamil Tigers, as well as those who facilitated those acts in using free speech and providing expert advice. Further, we need to find out why and how the main nations in international community who are at present citing international humanitarian law to put Sri Lanka on the dock conveniently in the past turned a blind eye or ignored crimes against humanity, war crimes, and mass killings of unarmed innocent civilians and genocide committed by the Tamil Tigers from 1983 to 2009. Once this analysis clearly established that the IHL at all times applicable to the atrocities of the LTT, an armed non-state actor according to the legal definition of the international humanitarian law, a question will emerge as to why the Western nations ignored those provisions and attempted to sustain Sri Lanka's Tiger outfit and failed to identify the individuals, even at present, advocating a separate state in Sri Lanka, who facilitated the criminal acts of the LTT. Internal conflicts constitute a unique form of conflict involving both guerrilla and regular armed forces that produce many difficult questions and legal problems. The first question to consider is whether the IHL is applicable to armed non-state actors and armed conflicts in which they are parties. Are individuals involved in or supportive of these armed groups to be regarded as criminals, lawful or unlawful combatants? Sri Lanka never endeavored to address above issues long before it ended the domestic terror violence created by the LTT to prepare for what it is facing today, dragged to Geneva, facing resolutions after resolutions, the last being in October 2015, which advocated that international jurists should be involved in probing Sri Lanka's alleged violation of IHL. United States co-sponsored that resolution early this year, prohibited investigators from International Criminal Court arriving in US, citing an infringement of its sovereignty. That's what the United States did. Even long after the LTT was defeated, while the call for international scrutiny was entering the narrative of the West, Sri Lanka never undertook to address the LTT culpability in terms of IHL to round up the remaining Tiger remnants in the US, such as Viswanathan Rudrakumaran and others living in many Western and Scandinavian countries whose involvement with the Tamil Tigers was well documented, advocating even arms transfer as a legitimate exercise to the Tigers, describing that outfit as a national liberation movement. What needs to be investigated is whether the IHL was applicable to the violent act of Sri Lanka's Tamil Tiger outfit during those years of terror. Remaining operatives, and whether the remaining operatives, facilitators, counselors, active participants of that outfit could be exposed before the law under the provisions of the IHL. The international humanitarian law has recognized 4 groups that fall within the category of armed non-state actors. Rebels. The insurgents constitute armed groups. That's the second group. Then the third group is national liberation movements are the third. Their main objective of these national liberation is to replace the existing state or form of their own. The last was the belligerents are the most organized. The act of belligerency is clearly defined in international law. I stress clearly defined in international law, pointing out certain conditions to be fulfilled first in order for a case of belligerency to be present. Number 1, the existence of an armed conflict, which Sri Lanka experienced. 2, occupation by the belligerents of a significant part of the national territory, which the LTT did in the northeastern Sri Lanka. 3, an internal organization exercising sovereignty on the part of the territory, which the LTT exercised in the north and east. 4, the same organization is keen on conducting an armed conflict in accordance with the IHL. The LTT totally ignored the provisions of the IHL. 5, circumstances which make it necessary for outside states to define their attitude by means of recognizing the belligerency, which under the Geneva Convention, the LTT is recognized as a belligerency. Except the fourth condition, the Tamil Tigers outfit fulfilled all the other conditions defined in international law to qualify as belligerents according to international law, are engaged in non-international armed conflict. Non-international armed conflicts are covered by Common Article 3, Protocol 2, several other treaties, as well as by customary law. Customary law acts both as a complement and a confirmation of the basic standards set by both Protocol 2 and Common Article 3. The traditional instruments stipulated in the Geneva Convention of 1949 and the 2 additional protocols of 1977 to protect human rights and restrain humanitarian abuses were developed to be applicable only to states. Since only states can have diplomatic relations with other states, sign treaties and be parties to international institutions, armed non-state actors such as the LTT were usually not expected to meet the same standard as states. Their acts of violence were seen as domestic problems of the state concerned to be dealt with through legal, political, or military means. The increased attention due to events such as Rwanda, Darfur, Afghanistan, Lebanon made the world change their framework of armed non-state actors. They came to be fairly recognized as the key players in international armed conflicts. This is why devices in the international humanitarian law were developed to make the non-state actors, armed non-state actors like LTT, responsible for their actions. The issue I raise here is whether the international community took any attempt to hold Sri Lanka's Tamil Tigers responsible for the violence unleashed during 1983-2009 period. I noted earlier that Sri Lanka's Tamil Tiger movement fell into the category of belligerents under the international law. I repeat, the international humanitarian law declared armed organizations such as the LTT because of the number 1, the existence of an armed conflict, 2, occupying in significant part of the national territory, 3, the armed group exercised sovereignty of part of the territory. It was also mentioned that due to the frequency of the internal armed conflict, as the one Sri Lanka experienced for 26 years, the international community was forced to realize that some form of regulation of non-international conflicts were needed. The effort to extend IHL to non-international armed conflicts, such as the one Sri Lanka experienced, ultimately resulted in the Article 3 common to the Geneva Convention, which is called Common Article 3. What does the common Article 3 mean? In the case of armed conflict, not an international character occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties, meaning the countries like Sri Lanka, which has entered into international covenants, such each party to the conflict, like Sri Lanka and the LTTE, shall be bound to apply as minimum the following provisions. This is the following provision. Persons taking no active part in hostilities, including members of the armed forces who have laid down their arms, and those placed disabled by sickness, wound, detention, or any other cause, shall in all circumstances be treated humanly, without any adverse distinction founded on race, color, religion, or faith, sex, birth, or wealth, or any other similar pattern. If one carefully reads the above common Article 3, many other provisions were applicable to the atrocities committed by the LTT fighting cadre. Also, it is applicable to the material supporters, such as persons like Viswanathan Rudrakumaran, who sustained Tiger terrorism for decades from their overseas force, who effectively engaged in fundraising, propaganda, and diplomatic endeavors, legal counseling, expert advice, and defending the procurement of armaments, justifying the Tiger movement as a liberation organization. The US Supreme Court in June 2010 upheld a federal law that makes it a crime to provide material support to foreign terrorist organizations, even if the help takes the form of training for peaceful resolving conflicts. The United States Federal Statute defined material support or resources as any property, tangible or intangible, or service, including currency or monetary instruments or financial securities, financial services, lodging and training. Listen to this. Expert advice or assistance. That is what Mr. Rudrakumaran did. Safe houses, false documentation, and so on a lot. Common Article 3 does not confer by any means recognition to the armed non-state actor involved in the conflict, nor does it change their status in international law. Provisions of the international law certainly do not provide any legitimacy to their cause, meaning Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention does not provide or did not provide any legitimacy to the Tamil Tiger cause. Therefore, those who provided material support, as was done by Rudrakumaran and others who are freely living in Western countries and in the Scandinavian region, who continue to advocate a separate state in Sri Lanka, violated provisions of the Geneva Convention under the international law. And in the case of Rudrakumaran, violated United States federal law as pronounced in June 2010 judgment of the US Supreme Court. While Common Article 3 does not provide a definition of non-international armed conflict, however, Article 1, Protocol 2 clarifies that the protocol applies to armed conflicts which take place, one, in the territory of state party to the protocol, that is Sri Lanka in a state party to the protocol. Two, between its armed forces and armed non-state actors, which A, are organized under the responsible command, which the LTT has done, B, exercise control over part of its territory, which LTT exercised, C, are able to carry out continuous and intensive military operation and to implement the protocol. When interpreting that, the LTT took the conflict to the territory of Sri Lanka, which is a state party to the Geneva Convention. The conflict was between the armed forces of the state of Sri Lanka. The LTT exercised control over part of Sri Lankan territory. The above description fits well to the armed conflict between the government of Sri Lanka and the LTT and controlling authority the LTT possessed during the conflict. Consider the applicability of the international humanitarian law to the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka and its actions. The condition of having a responsible authority and putting in place an organization do not imply that the hierarchical system of the Tamil Tiger outfit is similar to that of the armed forces of Sri Lanka. It simply points out the obligation of having an organization that exercises control over a certain amount of territory and capable of planning and carrying out continuous and concerted military operations. That's what the LTTE did. Now, the above interpretation of the international humanitarian law clearly shows how the LTTE fitted into the description and the applicability of the Protocol 2 to all the actions the LTTE committed during the 26 years of armed conflict against the legitimate government of Sri Lanka and its armed forces. The LTTE control of vast land and its hierarchical structure with the high intensity of conflict that Sri Lanka experienced and what the international community witnessed covered Protocol 2 and Common Article 3. Therefore, the protocol applies to the internal conflict between the LTTE and the GSL, Government of Sri Lanka, armed forces, as the above threshold had clearly passed. Once this threshold is passed, the application of the protocol is automatic. That is, no declaration has to be made by the parties to the conflict as long as the requirements of Article 1 of Protocol 2 are met. Both Common Article 3 and Protocol 2 apply simultaneously, automatically, to internal conflicts when certain threshold criteria are reached. We saw in Sri Lanka how these threshold criteria had met, and I pointed out these facts before. Protocol 2 describes its scope in considerable detail, excluding low-intensity conflicts. Sri Lanka experienced very high-intensity conflict during those 26 years. Article 1 makes application of Protocol 2 dependent on the exercise of de facto control of part of national territory, on the ability of material circumstances linked to the nature of the hostility, that is, the ability to carry out, organize, and sustain acts of violence and to implement the protocol. It applies to all armed conflicts in which these conditions are met, regardless of who triggered the conflict and why. This is where the provisions of the Geneva Convention cover from Elam War 1 through Elam War 4. All these conditions were present during the 26-year conflict in Sri Lanka that best could have seen the applicability to the LTTE and its acts. Now, if this is so, those who aided and abetted the LTTE to unleash the ruthless violent acts in its endeavor to bifurcate the Sri Lankan nation, and those who provided expert advice to the LTTE to engage in such acts too are covered by the Geneva Convention. The LTTE was totally annihilated in May 2009 and does not exist now. But those who gave material support to the LTTE are freely domiciled in many Western nations and in Scandinavian region, still advocating a separate state and division of Sri Lankan territory. Among them is the New York immigration attorney Visuwanathan Rudrakumaran, who heads an organization called the Transnational Government of Tamil Eelam, spread in many countries, advocating the division of Sri Lanka. The freedom they enjoy without being subject to international humanitarian law could facilitate another terrorist movement in the form of the LTTE in the sovereign state of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daya. Then I have received a few questions related to your presentation. But actually then there's one question coming from Chamali. I believe she's might be from Sri Lanka, but there is no indication. And why has the Sri Lankan government failed in efforts to persuade foreign government to sustain the proscription ban on the LTTE?
Say that again.
Why has the Sri Lankan government failed in its efforts to persuade foreign governments to sustain the proscription ban on the LTTE?
I have no idea what the Sri Lanka government is doing. But the Sri Lanka government need to take certain steps forward. One is that the Sri Lanka, the activists, former activists of the LTT, are fairly and very well organized in international fora. And as a person who worked in the U.S. Department of State, I know how they approach Western countries and their foreign policy makers. You know, so Sri Lanka had already earlier advocated, and in 1997 the U.S. Declared LTT as a foreign terrorist organization, thanks to the former Foreign Minister Lakshman Kadirgama, and after 2002-2003 failed Norwegian brokered peace talks, many European countries did it. But right now, the Sri Lanka needs to step up. Their foreign ministry needs to step up and tell foreign ministry that if you deproscribe the LTT, there will be a problem within Sri Lanka, because they can easily, freely advocate this thing, because advocacy has still gone. It's being in international arena. So Sri Lanka needs to step up to use this foreign office to persuade other countries to maintain the proscription of the LTTE.
And but actually, this question from Chamila, I believe, she answered this question from UK, and she just typed the message. Okay, so now my invitation to our next speaker. Next speaker is a Dr. Mohamed Ghazel. Dr. Ghazel is the founder of the Center for Peace and Reconciliation Studies, a non-profit NGO based in Geneva, Switzerland. Dr. Ghazel's research areas focuses on the history of the World War I, terrorism, decolonization, genocide, and peacemaking. Dr. Ghazel received a Professor Dr. Honoris Causa from International Academy of Science, Vector, Baku, Azerbaijan. He was nominated 2 times to the Nobel Peace Prize, alone for his efforts to prevent a new future legitimate civil war by the United Nations in Iraq and solving the problem of the stateless of all minorities in Myanmar. Dr. Ghazel was also nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize together with His Excellency Leon Tse from Hawaii for their work on peaceful solutions of the West Papua dispute. So may I invite Dr. Ghazel to address the podium. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Neville, and for inviting me, and greetings to everybody. And I'm so grateful for the first speaker, and it's an excellent presentation. With that, in fact, my presentation in a way limited, so I will make it in a short way. But what I will say is that I know LTT very well for some years inside the UN, and I can say that I received that threats inside the UN from the pro-LTT members. And I can say that LTT is really strong and have effective political control on different independence movements in different parts of the world, and they force them not to define LTT as a terrorist inside the UN. Now, let's say, what is the political roadmap of the LTT? Now, LTT's political roadmap depends on an amnesty, and from that, their recognition as a terrorist organization will be changed to a non-state armed group, and then they can say that they are a recognized national liberation movement. But most important, the game that LTT play is that they are not recognized as a terrorist organization by the United Nations. I mean, United Nations did not take any, Security Council did not take any resolution against the LTT, but there are the Human Rights Council resolutions. and they play on this game. Before entering how they played a very dirty game, I have to say that what we are talking here is not a political choice. This is the game that LTT tries to make. It's not a political choice. It's an obligation to define LTT as a terrorist organization, and it constitutes a hate speech not to define LTT as a terrorist organization. When there is a hate speech, then it comes to a hate crime. It's a hate crime in the UN legal system not to define LTT as a terrorist. This is the game that we have to stop. But let me tell you something from my nose. So they play the game of being a freedom fighter. And I have to say that till 1994, there are the international humanitarian law, but inside the UN, the international humanitarian law is another school. And to kill civilians by the so-called National Liberation Movement was not criminalized till 1994. And this is the game still LTT tries to play. And also some other independence movements. Until 1994, a so-called self-defined National Liberation Movement, armed group, can go and kill some civilians. They can put bombs in the civilian areas, and they can say that, hey, we are a freedom fighter, and they are with the others, so sometimes we can kill the civilians. This was the reality. And LTT is playing the game, and the people in Europe or other places, unfortunately, inside the UN as well. But what I said inside the UN, not the states. Some of the staff of the UN, even bought by LTT, or being adapted for this course of so-called freedom fighter. Remember one thing, by resolution 49/60 of 9 December 1994, in any circumstances, killing the civilians are justifiable, whatever the consideration of political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any other nature that may be invoked to justify that. So with that resolution, it's a declaration, unequivocal condemnation of all acts, methods, and practices of terrorism. It's a declaration of General Assembly. Now, UN is bound. Nothing can justify the acts of violence of terrorism. So there is also one thing I have to say, not to enter the detail. There is the problem of defining terrorism, and they say that there is no definition of terrorism. The problem of the defining of terrorism based on one logic. Sorry to say, but who has got a right to kill someone with uniform? I mean, a person, you can say that it's a Russian government, and you can kill the soldier or the police of the person, and they can say that this is not terrorism. This is the debate what's going on. But when you systematically kill the civilians, this is terrorism. The problematic of defining terrorism is on the problematic of who are to kill uniformed people. So now we will see. I will tell the dirty game how the LTT try to do, and they are very active. Now, the dirty game begin. How can I say, after 1994, inside the UN, I'm saying, and the political roadmap, how they try to buy politicians in the United Kingdom, the LTT, using the Human Rights Council Resolution 30/N and 40/N, the OECD report. So everybody knows that there is some dirty games. In 2010, the Secretary General of the United Nations appointed a panel of experts to advise him of options for addressing accountability in Sri Lanka, and reported 2011, and they do not define LTT as a terrorist organization, which constitutes, in fact, a hate crime. In a report given to the Secretary General, I will say why it's a hate crime now within the UN documentations. And UN is not a place of political choices as well. UN has a charter, UN has its own declarations, UN has its own resolutions, and the staff are bound by them. They are not there for their political choices. This is the important point. I will mention a very dirty game. How LTT is doing, and how a game is being played with other options trying to be done inside the UN. Now, in 2014, by Resolution 5/1 promoting reconciliation, accountability, and human rights in Sri Lanka, the Human Rights Council requested the Office of High Commission for Human Rights in the operational article 10 that a committee of inquiry to be established for the last period of the armed conflict as to organize a special investigation from the Office of the High Commissioner. But in the preamble of the 25/1, the past armed conflict defined as combat terrorism. This is important. Why? When there's a resolution in the General Assembly and Security Council or the Human Rights Council, in the preamble, you define the situations, and in the operative paragraphs, you get into actions subject to the definitions you make in the preamble. And what they did is that they defined the past armed conflict in Sri Lanka combat terrorism. What is combat terrorism? It's not an internal war. When it is a combat terrorism, LTT is not a non-state armed group. LTT is a terrorist organization by the definition of Human Rights Council. And it's not, is it a political choice? I will come to a dirty point. When OECD prepared its report, then we saw something very interesting. With the authorization letter that is subject to be prepared, and the committee of inquiry consists of 3 persons. One is the president of Finland and 2 other people. But in general, let me tell you the truth. Sometimes the committee inquiry of signatories, important people, they just have their wine or whiskey in the cocktail, and the political staff of the UN prepared the report. Now, I will ask at the end of my speech, a criminal investigation to be opened by the United Nations Human Rights Council to the 7 people that prepared the OECD report and their relations by Interpol. This is important because this is the shameful history of the human rights inside the, inside the Human Rights Council and the United Nations. Unfortunately, this happened to Sri Lanka. In the OECD report, they played a very dirty game. When it is mentioned combat terrorism, the OECD report must be prepared subject to the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy. And I have to say, when you mention non-state armed group, and they define LTT as a non-state armed group, but they should define them as a terrorist organization, they played a dirty game. The dirty game is the difference between the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy and international humanitarian law. When it is international humanitarian law, the territory is limited by Sri Lanka, the armed conflict place. And the time is limited as well. When the fightings are finished, it is finished. And only the territory. But when it is UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, there are the preventive measures to prevent reoccurrence. That is the finance of terrorism. A committee of inquiry should be established by the Human Rights Council for the finance of terrorism. This can be the first time in the history of UN other than UN Security Council. But when they define the situation as internal war, armed conflict, they give amnesty to the LTT. Who gave it? 7 people, staff who prepared the OECD report, which must be investigated by Interpol. The signatures are not important. They just drank their wine, as I believe, including the Finnish president, one of the signatories. Until this time, Sri Lanka foreign minister never got into action of it. And there's the, how we can say that, not to define LTT as a terrorist organization, creates a hate speech with the UN Security Council resolution on another subject. Now, as I mentioned, they played a dirty game, the OECD reporter, the 7 people. Who are them? We don't know. They've got immunity. No, they cannot have immunity when they bypass the UN resolutions. What they did it in the OECD report in paragraph 49. This is the important point. They wrote that the LTT developed as a ruthless and formidable military organization capable of holding large swaths of territory in the north, is expelling Muslims and Shintoist communities. The word is expelling Muslim and Shintoist communities. Let me tell you what is the expel means. Forced deportation. Forced deportation means ethnic cleansing. In ethnic cleansing, you don't need to kill thousands of people. Forced deportation is the crime of ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing is the crime against humanity. So, as I mentioned, 7 people who prepared OECD report. They wrote that expelling Muslims and Shintoists. So by using this word, they give amnesty, impunity for a crime against humanity. And when it is crimes against humanity, I will mention Rome Statute of International Criminal Court, Article 7, deportation or forcible transfer of population, crime against humanity. What the UN report made, OECD report, expelling, not deportation or forcible transfer. So you see how a dirty game is being played by LTT, by money, or by political choice, but they cannot make a political choice. There is a subject to be investigated by the Interpol urgently. And let me come. Now, we know that in the OECD report, even if it is not defined, the dirty game, they did not define LTT as a terrorist organization, defined the situation as a non-state armed group. This is a crime, and they give impunity to the crime of against humanity. Let me remind you one thing. Peace agreement between the government of Sierra Leone and long peace agreement. And I don't want to enter the detail, but what has happened in the long peace agreement is that they give amnesty clauses in the peace agreement. And then the representative of Secretary General of the UN, High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Gripson, instructed UN representative there not to sign the agreement, the name of Okala, and Okala convinced the UN that this signature was necessary for the peace agreement, but say that United Nations will not recognize amnesty for acts of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other serious violations of international humanitarian law. And as per requested by the Security Council Resolution 1231 and 1315, the UN Security Council said that I do not accept any amnesty for the crimes against humanity. UN Security Council is the highest place, and all its decisions has a binding, because UN Human Rights Council is the down place. So what we see, I'll come to the resolutions, but OECD report gave amnesty, impunity for a crime against humanity by using a word, and they said that they just expelled 75,000 people. And what we see, UN Security Council resolutions for Sierra Leone and Loma Agreement, no amnesty, but OECD gave amnesty. And Human Rights Council resolution 30/1, they should ask for an international criminal investigation for the finance of terrorism in Sri Lanka. Why? Because in the preamble of the 30/1, the resolution also gives the reference of the resolution 35/1, and there's a definition of combat terrorism. And when you define combat terrorism, United Kingdom, you have to ask for a UN implementation of UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy Pillar 3. And on preventive measures, you have to ask for an international criminal investigation for the finance of terrorism. And the Human Rights Council resolution 30/1 still define LTT as a terrorist, even it is not written in the operative paragraphs. But there's another dirty game came after. This is how the acts, you have to see the, how can I say, how the dirty game plays inside the UN, with money, of course. Why so many political organizations, and especially Muslims, refused to define LTT as a terrorist organization, even they had made so much massacres inside the mosque, and they made ethnic cleansing to the Muslims. It's money. The Kashmiris, Rohingyas, some Kashmiris, even some Polisario Front people, they refuse to define LTT as terrorists. I don't need to enter the South America, where the drug business continues. And many indigenous communities refuse to define LTT as terrorists. It's all for money. Nothing is sometimes on humanitarian issues inside the UN. I always say that the only thing missing inside the Human Rights Council sessions is the human rights. Now, let's say, I will finish in 2 minutes. Sri Lanka in resolution 30/1, in the operative paragraph, The Human Rights Council recognized the need for a process of accountability for reconciliation for the violations and abuses committed by the liberation of Tamil Tigers. ELAM is highlighted in the report of policy. But they did not ask for a criminal investigation for the finance of terrorism. And in the last resolution, 40/M, they never mentioned anything. In the operative clause 1, they only asked to implement fully measure identified by its resolution 30/M for the Sri Lanka government, but not criminal responsibility of the LTT in the operative clauses. A total impunity has been given. So the resolutions of the Sri Lanka by the Human Rights Council, it is null and void. Sri Lanka government can put the desk on his hand and say that first open the criminal investigation for the finance of terrorism on preventive measures. Let's see the accountability. And maybe we have to talk one more thing in another program of how a so-called genocide created by the same 7 people, by not respecting the UN principles and procedures to prepare a committee of inquiry for the gross violations of human rights. Now, let's see, I will say, LTT, not to define LTT, constitutes a hate speech and it constitutes a hate crime because they made an ethnic cleansing to the Sinhalese and Sinhalese and Muslims in Sri Lanka. And there is no amnesty can be given. And if you do not define LTT as a terrorist, you legitimize the crime against humanity. And we have got a concept of the Sierra Leone Law Agreement that no amnesty can be possible. And I would like to mention one thing. United Kingdom, any politician inside the UN Parliament, the UK Parliament, or any part of the world, or a so-called human rights defender, are within the obligations. And the United Kingdom Parliament had an obligation as well, under Article 103 of the UN Charter, not to legitimize an ethnic cleansing action group by giving amnesty clause to them, by not defining them as a terrorist organization. And maybe in another program, we can also talk, as I mentioned, the genocide problem, the so-called genocide prepared on paperwork by 7 people, and how the genocide, so-called genocide, LTT tried to put another civil war, not civil war, a terrorist organization movement inside the UN in different perspectives. Many thanks, Dr. Melo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gassel. And during your presentation, I have received a few questions online as well as by email. One of the questions came from Suresh Nagalingam from Toronto, Canada. And he stated that you have stated UN Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy has a prime responsibility to investigate financing of terrorism. During 26 years of civil war in Canada, Tamil diaspora, especially diaspora and LTTE supporters, contributed minimum of 22 million annually according to the Canadian Intelligence Services. Question is here, are there any possibility UN agencies to investigate financing of LTTE Tamil terrorism? Why United Nations Human Rights Council has ignored when drafting UN Resolution 30-1?
Yeah, it's a really good question, but we have to say that also one of the main objectives is to protect the innocent. And to protect the innocent, I know other diasporas and forcibly funding of the people living abroad, not only with LTT, all the other groups. The innocents are the people that are came in a way migrant or immigrant in foreign countries, and they had taken forcibly this money, and they can never go to the police. They're afraid. Their relatives are in their home countries, but the main money doesn't come from the funding of the persons. $100 or $200. LTT doing drug business. They are the warlords. We have to mention also in the political roadmap why these things are going. They've got a huge sector. And CIA fact sheet page in internet says that they have got a position of 300 to 400 million a yearly earning, but not only from the collecting money from the people, from criminal business. They are still in their dirty business and drug business or money laundering. And why till this time never mentioned these kind of things is that maybe sometimes not to know is much better, but till this time UN Security Council acted newly for the finance of terrorism. And it is not an easy job. First of all, Interpol must prepare something. And with that, some restrictions could be taken by the UN Security Council. And first, the Interpol should prepare the name and the list and the peoples. So, in fact, it is much more on the secret coordination of the governments to prevent finance of terrorism individually, but they can prepare the reports. This is a little bit complicated issue and not easy to answer in 5 minutes. I hope my answer is in a way enough.
Thank you very much. I have received another question from Switzerland, Ranil Jayanathan. He mentioned here, Switzerland also sponsored for the first UN resolution against Sri Lanka in 2009. How do you gauge Switzerland's involvement in the post-war Tamil Tiger projects of separating Sri Lanka?
Well, I don't know the detail because I'm working in different subjects, but I don't follow especially the Switzerland government. I'm not saying that because I'm living in Switzerland. I like the way of some actings of Swiss Foreign Ministry. For example, another subject must be talked also the Norwegian peace process, and also LTT is trying to use the Norwegian peace process as a pretext of recognizing as a non-state actor, but Norwegian peace process, as I mentioned, is null and void according to the UN Security Council Resolution Sierra Leone. I do believe that Switzerland government can play a mediator role. Let's forget about the past, but for the future, for solving these problematic issues inside the UN, inside the UN Geneva office, and I can believe that for the next resolution, Swiss government can be can have a positive role.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gassel. And so it is a very informative and excellent presentation. Thank you very much on behalf of Ontario Centre for Policy Research, and we are very grateful to your presentation. And our next speaker is joining with us from Sri Lanka, Shamindra Ferdinando, and having joined the Sri Lanka Daily, The Island in June 1987, as a trainee journalist, Shamindra Ferdinando continued to serve the same editorial for over 3 decades. As a young journalist, he had the chance to cover the Indian Army deployment in northern eastern part of Sri Lanka from July 1987 to March 1990, Indian peacekeeping force in terms of Indulanka Accord and the southern insurgency during the extreme volatile period. After the conclusion of the war in May 2009, Ferdinando focused on post-conflict issues, particularly accountability issues. His extensive coverage of the conflict and related issues received public attention over the years, and the opportunity to discuss such matters both on television and radio on numerous occasions. Among those who had been interviewed by Ferdinando, pertaining to the conflict and post-conflict matters in Sri Lanka is Lord Nesby, whose October 2017 disclosure of in the House of Lords of classified British document gave Sri Lanka a real chance of countering unsubstantiated war crime allegation leading to Sri Lanka. May I invite Shamindra Fernando joining us from Sri Lanka to address this webinar.
Hello. I really appreciate the opportunity given to me. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Western governments' response to various situations is largely based on domestic political concerns. The Western powers conveniently calling themselves the international community is responding to post-war developments in Sri Lanka, depending primarily on the relationship between Tamil diaspora groups and major political parties therein. Over a decade after the successful conclusion of the war, the separatist agenda remains a viable threat. Though the revival of the once feared conventional military capability of the LTT is no longer in the horizon. However, the LTT's defeat has made it easier for Western powers to work with influential Tamil groups pursuing a common agenda with some lawmakers in Sri Lanka parliament. Regardless of what foreign government and Tamil diaspora groups say, it is nothing but a political arrangement meant to secure the latter's support at crucial elections. What the LTT couldn't achieve through terrorism and military means, its rump and followers might be able to secure with foreign intervention. That is a reality, a possibility Sri Lanka cannot ignore. The stimulation and glorification of terrorism through costly propaganda campaigns and political exercises at the expense of elected governments here portend grave danger to post-war Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka's political setup ignored the growing threat, much to the discomfort of those who strongly believe in the country's unitary status. In fact, the LTT's defeat has paved the way for Western powers to move the UN in support of those seeking a new constitution at the expense of country's unitary status. The October 2015 Geneva resolution, co-sponsored by the treacherous Sirisena Wickremesinghe government, is a case in point. For want of cohesive action on the part of successive Sri Lankan governments, including the war-winning Rajapaksa administration that brought the war to an end in May 2009, some of those who had pursued a separatist agenda, though not really involved with the LTT during the war, are now at the forefront of high-profile diaspora projects to divide the country on ethnic lines. Their successes largely depend on overseas political support and backing received from INGOs. On one hand, a section of the international community accommodated separatist elements and made them a part of their domestic political system, while undermining Sri Lanka by adopting the war crimes resolution in Geneva in 2015. The Geneva intervention is nothing but glorification of those who wage war against a member state of the UN. The Geneva project should be examined against the backdrop of annual commemorative events held in various parts of the world with the backing of both governments as well as political opposition there. Growing number of voters of Sri Lankan origin living in different countries, lucrative industry in accommodating asylum seekers, and human rights lobby contribute to the mounting insidious campaign against Sri Lanka. Actually, Sri Lanka now faces a bigger threat in spite of the eradication of the LTT's military capability. One-time LTT mouthpiece, the Tamil National Alliance succeeded in compelling Sri Lanka to launch a new constitution-making process, severely inimical to the country. That project had the backing of the US and the UN and could have succeeded if not for treasury bond scams perpetrated by the then ruling party, resulting in political turmoil in Sri Lanka. What Sri Lanka should keep in mind is that the absence of a military threat does not mean the country's unitary status cannot be challenged and overwhelmed by other means. Having backed General Sarath Fonseca's presidential polls campaign in 2010 and Maithripala Sirisena's 5 years later, the TNA proved its readiness to change its political tactics with an eye on its overall project to break up the country. Thanks to WikiLeaks, the role played by the US in the formation of the UNP-led alliance to back Fonseca is in the public domain now. It would be a grave mistake on our part to ignore such developments while opposing propaganda exercises such as annual commemorative events. The real threat comes from Western politicians seeking electoral arrangements with Tamil groups in their countries for votes. Before further discussion on the post-war relationship between foreign political parties and Tamil groups, let me recollect the Indian intervention in Sri Lanka. Why did India militarily intervene in Sri Lanka in the 1980s? The late Jane Dixit in early 2004 revealed hitherto unknown reasons for their intervention. Referring to Sri Lanka's relationship with US, Israel, and Pakistan, Dixit explained why the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi threw her weight behind Sri Lankan terrorist groups. Dixit, one-time Indian High Commissioner in Colombo, asserted in Makers of India's Foreign Policy that Premier Gandhi could be faulted on two foreign policy decisions. Let me quote. Her ambiguous response to Russian intrusion into Afghanistan and her giving active support to Sri Lankan Tamil militants. Whatever the criticisms about these decisions, it cannot be denied that she took them on the basis of her assessments about India's national interests. Her logic was that she couldn't openly alienate the former Soviet Union when India was so dependent on that country for defense supplies and technology. Similarly, she could not afford the emergence of Tamil separatism in India by refusing to support the aspirations of Sri Lankan Tamils. Dixit added, in both cases, her decisions, he was referring to Indira Gandhi, her decisions were relevant at the point of the time they were taken. In other words, India jeopardized Sri Lanka to protect her interests. Indian project paved the way for an attempt to overthrow the Maldivian government in early November 1998. Indian trained Sri Lankan terrorists almost succeeded in seizing control of that country. Perhaps such raids are not possible today, although foreign governments overtly and covertly support those seeking to subvert smaller countries. The British pursue an anti-Sri Lanka policy. Maybe their approach is the worst among the countries still backing the LTT agenda a decade after the war ended. British actions promoted terrorism in a big way, while undermining Sri Lanka. Long-standing British policies are inimical to Sri Lanka. They brazenly played politics with Sri Lanka throughout the war, finally making a last-ditch attempt to save the LTT in 2009. If the British-French bid to halt the Sri Lankan military offensive succeeded in April 2009, terrorism would have received unprecedented recognition. The British glorified terrorism, still do for political reasons, though all politicians cannot be faulted. However, the British, now the leading country in the Sri Lanka core group, is pursuing war crimes investigation against us under the 2015 Geneva Resolution by remaining its key supporter. Having failed to save the LTT, the UK, a member of the Geneva-based Human Rights Council, now pursues war crimes probe as part of its overall efforts to appease British voters of Sri Lankan Tamil origin. The UK has refused to consider wartime cables from its High Commission in Colombo. Those classified cables dispatched by its defense advisor in Colombo in January-May 2009 and exposed by Lord Naseby in October 2017 disputed the very basis of the Geneva Resolution. Lord Naseby had to utilize the Freedom of Information Act 2000 to secure the documents. The British tried desperately to prevent the release of those documents. A leak made 2009 US diplomatic cable originating from its mission in London a few months after the war proved the relation between Tamil diaspora and the British establishment. Thanks to WikiLeaks, we know why the British played dirty politics with Sri Lanka and still do. A statement attributed to the then Foreign Secretary David Miliband revealed the Labour Party's dependence on Tamil voters. The ground situation remains the same, with the Sri Lankan Tamil population in the UK numbering well over 300,000 and further growing. The British will continue that despicable tragedy. That is the undeniable truth. So it is no wonder the US and UK are now all out to persecute WikiLeaks head Julian Assange, exposing to the world unparalleled truth about what happened to Sri Lanka and many other countries. Sri Lanka shouldn't expect British or the Canadians to give up their cozy relationship with the Tamil diaspora for our benefit. Politics is a dirty game. The bulk of our own politicians and utterly corrupt parliamentary system over the years proved over and over again, political interests always come ahead of national interests. At the commencement of new parliament, several moons ago, two lawmakers, both leaders of Jaffnavi's political parties, C.V. Vigneswaran and Gajendra Kumar Ponnambalam, accused the war-winning military of genocide. The speaker upheld their right to speak freely in parliament. He continues to do so. Sri Lanka parliament never found fault with the TNA that functioned as the political wing of the LTT during the conflict and went to the extent of recognizing Prabhakaran as the sole representative of the Tamil-speaking people. The TNA glorified the LTT. Some of its members participated in passing out parades of forcibly recruited children, and at the 2005 presidential election, ordered Tamils not to vote. But no one bothered to take up the issue with the TNA leadership. After the war, the TNA established close working relationship with the UK headquartered Global Tamil Forum. The GTF played its cards well. The GTF once employed Labour lawmaker John Ryan as its chief executive and policy advisor. Why should we be surprised over an MP being on the GTF's payroll, especially against the backdrop of it having parliamentary recognition in the UK? Many do not know the inauguration of the GTF took place in the British Parliament in early 2010, with the participation of top political party representatives. Later, Ryan returned to Parliament to continue her role. Perhaps many Sri Lankans may not be aware of how Ryan, along with McDonough, another MP, requested Foreign Secretary to expel Sri Lankan Defence Attaché, Brigadier Priyanka Fernando, over what they call inappropriate, unacceptable, and threatening conduct of the officer. McDonough, in September 2011, declared in UK Parliament that the Sri Lankan military killed 100,000 Tamils, including 40,000 civilians, in January-May 2009 alone. In 2012, McDonough, along with an Australian MP, nominated ITN Channel 4 team that produced Sri Lanka Killing Fields for the Nobel Peace Prize. The British had a way with the diaspora. Special treatment afforded to British citizen of Sri Lankan Tamil origin, Anton Balasingham, underscored the UK policy. British citizen Balasingham, a former British High Commission employee in Colombo, was allowed to function as the LTT's advisor in spite of proscription of that group. The British policy remained the same even after the LTT assassination of Indian leader Rajiv Gandhi in April, I think it's not in April, May 1991. And the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister Lakshman Kadirgam in August 2005. Instead of stripping Balasingham of given nationality, the British facilitated a secret meeting between high-level Norwegian delegation and Balasingham in the UK to discuss Kadirgam assessment. Terrorism received a mega boost when the UK's Conservative Party, in the run-up to December 2019 general election, proposed what it called a two-state solution to solve the Sri Lankan problem. The Conservative manifesto declared, quote, "We will continue to support international initiatives to achieve reconciliation, stability, and justice across the world, and in the former conflict zones such as Cyprus and Sri Lanka and the Middle East, where we maintain our support for a two-state solution." Sri Lanka opposed that statement. In the wake of Colombo's opposition, the Conservative Party claimed the two-state solution with reference to Israel-Palestinian situation. The UK's policy is nothing but horrible. Balasingham's widow, Adela, often pictured handing over cyanide capsule to LTT terrorists, is living in the UK. The UK obviously promoted terrorism by benching backwards. The UK obviously promoted terrorism by bending backwards to appease Tamil voters. There cannot be a better example than the Tamils forcing Cineworld, Odeon, and Woo to cancel the screening of Shoot It Sika's Madras Cafe in late 2013. Tamils threatened the UK with violence if cinemas went ahead. Have you ever heard of a diaspora of any origin threatening violence over screening of a movie? What the Tamils couldn't stomach was Madras Cafe's portrayal of the LTT assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, a despicable crime that deeply wounded India, the godfather of terrorism in Sri Lanka. In March 2011, ahead of Geneva sessions, US Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, Robert Blake, who was also one-time US ambassador in Colombo, received a top GTF delegation in Washington. GTF's president, Reverend Father S.J. Emanuel, led the delegation. I had the opportunity to meet the GTF president in London in early 2015, soon after him, in the company of other GTF live wire, Surendran, with the Sri Lankan government delegation led by President Sirse. Recent Canadian rejection of a petition by MP Gary Andasangari seeking government support for a legislative effort to remove sovereign immunity as a defense by states against genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, torture, and enforced disappearances is certainly something Sri Lanka Canadian Action Coalition can be quite proud of. Canada also rejected Andasangari's call to refer Sri Lanka to the committee established under the Convention Against Enforced Disappearances under its Article 32. However, Sri Lanka should be cautious of ongoing moves in different countries to pressure Sri Lanka over accountability issues. The move to do away with the UK ban on the LTT may give a turbo boost to separatist agenda. UK's proscribed organizations appeal commission found that a 2001 decision to keep the ban on the LTT was flawed and unlawful and may open the way for proscription to be lifted. It would be pertinent to mention that foreign governments tolerate various diaspora groups because they can be used to exert pressure on targeted administrations. Nothing can be further from the truth that Western governments are interested in human rights. The world knows how US British coalition cooked up weapons of mass destruction allegations to invade Iraq in 2003. Those Iraqis who cooperated with Western powers were hailed heroes. We have similar situations in Sri Lanka also. The UK-US project destroyed Iraq. Sri Lanka needs a cohesive action plan to counter lies. Our failure has caused setbacks. In the absence of a tangible action plan, the country suffered badly. Sri Lanka remains in Geneva's agenda. It is proven by the fact that much celebrated Lieutenant General Shavindra Silla has been categorized as a war criminal on mere hearsay or allegations. Our failure to prove our innocence is even worse than glorification of LTT terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shavindra. I have received actually 19 questions related to your specifically your presentation, but I cannot answer this, address this all the 19 questions because of this time constraint. But there was one question came from K. Loganathan, Montreal, Canada, and his question was, you stated that Sri Lanka now faced a bigger threat in spite of the eradication of the LTTE's military capacity. Can you explain this statement, how it will affect to peace and ethnic harmony in Sri Lanka? So you have 2 minutes.
Actually, the presence of the LTT during the war sort of impaired, affected Western governments working on this project. Now that the LTT has been eradicated, the Western powers, EU included, they are free to work with Tamil political parties in Sri Lanka. Now, I can point out in 2010, as I pointed out earlier, US orchestrated a project which led to the Tamil National Alliance, which accused the Sri Lankan army of killing thousands of Tamils to vote for General Sarath Fonseca, right? So, in the absence of the LTT, military and terrorist power, the foreign powers find it easier to work with the Tamil National Alliance. So I remember M.A. Sumandiran addressing a meeting in Washington in, I think, June 2016, he revealed for the first time that the TNA, the US, and the then Sri Lankan government reached an agreement on a mechanism to involve foreign judges in Sri Lanka. So it's easy for foreign governments to work with Tamil political parties for the same objectives in the absence of the LTT. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the answer. Now, actually, I'm going to open the floor for the panel. I think Daya Gamage should be joining very soon. I cannot connect with him. We have received a very important letter from one, but actually it's a letter, but it's a question from one of the Tamil group in Toronto. I'm sharing his letter, and he sent it to us November 20th, 2020, and he himself identify as a, this is his long letter, Muka Tamils Parai Media, his phone number also there, then Parai Media and Muka Tamil. But I don't know, it's a group or maybe individual person. So then my question for the panel, then you have every person, everyone to answer the question about the 2 minutes each. And he mentioned that my name is Muka Tamil, and he said I was born in Sri Lanka, Tamil Ilam, I'm a Tamil. And so then he expressed some of the issues, but I think the most appropriate issue is here. It is mainly for Dr. Shamindra Fernando. And he said from 1956 onward, people turned to support the struggle of indigenous Tamil people when they were systematically discriminated by the succession of the Sinhala-dominated government because of what was done in the Tamil. Can you explain this is the validity of this statement, Shamindra, that I'm forwarding that question to Shamindra in Sri Lanka.
No, there's no point in denying the fact that certain injustices were done to the Tamil people. So I believe Sri Lanka, as a nation, we should accept responsibility for whatever the shortcomings and the mistakes on our part. We must do that. But terrorism is not the answer. As I pointed out in my presentation, the former Indian High Commissioner in Colombo, J.N. Dixit, he very clearly pointed out, he revealed actually that India got involved in Sri Lanka and backed terrorism because India felt if India did not support Tamil separatism here, it would cause a problem in Tamil Nadu. So to to control the situation there, they threw the Indian military might against Sri Lanka. So therefore, if you take the political party system here, you will realize not only the Tamils, the Sinhalese, the Sinhala Buddhists, and the Muslims too suffered during this period. So it's not a exclusive Tamil problem for them to take up arms. President Jayawardena's government could have controlled the situation without much difficulty if India did not intervene. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. But there are a number of questions are here. So let me see what is his. He has some. Okay, so I think that
Neville, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, Daya, that we are waiting for you.
I want to make a little comment on that particular question that you raised.
Okay, go ahead.
The general propaganda is that separatism emerged after 1956 Sinhala only. But in 1947 September, the Hansard has this. 1947 September, the first parliament, the Tamil leader the number 2 of the Tamil Congress, SJV Chelvanayagam, made a statement in 1947 September in the first parliament, saying that, I quote, if Ceylon wants to secede from Great Britain, Tamil nation wants to secede from Ceylon. That was the first sowing of the separatism in 1947. Where was the problem in 1947? The Tamil minority had 45% of places in the universities. The Tamil minorities had almost 50% in public service. So 1947, this is what HJV Chelvanayagam said. I just want to make that statement.
Okay, thank you very much, Daya. We have but actually we supposed to finish this event by 12:15, but it has gone to another few minutes, extend another few minutes. But I want to but this group is very democratic group, so they have grievances and they brought forward, and we really appreciate that, and we would like to work with this group and to find the solution. But important issue is that terrorism is not the answer. So that is the important issue. You have to denounce the violence and come up with the political solution for the ethnic issue. So this is another question. I am going to put it very quickly. You have only 2 minutes, then I will round off to each and every panelist. They say, this group is saying, we cannot ask equal rights for Sri Lankan anymore, as the Sinhalese have destroyed a lot of our land, power, and people. And we want independent state, which is Tamil Eelam. Can you please elaborate something about this statement? It is possible. And so what are the outcomes of this international law? So what are the issues surrounding this statement? So then I will forward it to the, again, Shamindra in Sri Lanka.
I must tell you, Eelam is not possible in Sri Lanka. They will never get a separate state in Sri Lanka. So that's it. Over a period of time, the Tamil community continue to propagate lies, blatant lies, to promote a separate state. Now, in the document showed here, they accuse Sri Lanka of killing 500,000 Tamil civilians. I mean, it's a blatant lie with the aim of misleading the international community. So I think our Tamil brothers must understand they cannot have a separate state by propagating lies. They will never get it because the armed struggle failed. And I feel, as a Sri Lankan, I feel they are still moving around, making some sort of progress due to failures on the part of Sri Lankan government, the Sri Lankan leadership, which has allowed Tamil MPs, those who work with the LTT, to remain in parliament. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, recently, I mean, 2 days before, not 2 days before, yesterday, we saw Gajendra Kumar Ponnamalam, MP from Jaffna. He accused the Sri Lankan military of genocide and various other accusations. And there was Field Marshal Sarath Fonseka, the former army commander, who defended the country. Unfortunately, the ministers were silent in parliament. So I think the Tamil community must be told that a separate state is not possible in Sri Lanka under any circumstances.
Thank you very much.
Neville, this is Daya. May I make a comment?
Yes, please. So this is your turn. Yes.
That question that came, I want to draw the attention to the election results of August 2020. What happened in the north? The Mr. Vigneswaram has gone on record saying that Tamil nationalism has gone into hibernation. See what happened in the north, the election results. The Tamil nationalism actually promoted separatism, promoted the Tamil homeland, that collapsed in the August 2020 election results. Shamindra will know much better than I do what really happened in the north. And Mr. Vignesaram has gone on record that Tamil nationalism has gone into hibernation. That is my point here. And I think Shavendra will know much better than what happened in the north.
Okay, thank you very much. And so we are coming to a few minutes away from the stop this.
Obviously, I want to add something. Just two lines. I mean, the day the Tamil National Alliance, Honorable Sambandhan declared support for General Sarath Fonseca in 2010 January. I think after that, the community has no right to talk about this issue at all, because the Tamil community, the people from in all the 7 or 8 districts where the Tamils live, primarily live from Jaffna, Vanni, Mana, Batticaload, Trincomalee, and Digamadulla. They all voted for General Fonseca. So having voted for the army commander who commanded the army, the victorious army, what is the point in demanding, continuing with allegations now? Because they supported Fonseca. And Fonseca won all northern and eastern districts. So therefore, these allegations about war crimes, there's no point in continuing with it, Doctor.
Thank you very much for your comment. I will invite Dr. Gassel to provide just 1 minute or 2 minutes comment about this issue. The question is that, is it possible to achieve independent state of Tamil Eelam in Sri Lanka?
I mean, I'm working for the independence of some decolonization movements by myself, and I am saying that I am to change some UN Security Council resolutions for Cyprus for the recognition of Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus on decolonization. For the international legal sense, that is the UN-based system, this is something different. I mean, it's not codified, but what has happened after 1956 is the result of the political psychology of the people. This is the problem of the decolonization. When we remember what has happened in Rwanda, it is the result of the political psychology of the people after decolonization, even after 100 years, on the hatred made by the colonizer power. So here, what is the United Kingdom try to nullify, like Rwanda, which nullified by Belgium that they had got no responsibility, is the responsibility of the United Kingdom, which made hatred in Sri Lanka between the communities. So this is a problem of peace and reconciliation studies. But before finishing, it's something other than that must be spoken, but I would like to mention a danger for February. In March, there is a new meeting for the Human Rights Session. Sri Lanka Muslims may not be represented truly by the real Sri Lanka Muslims. They can be bought by this LTT, as I see some people. Sri Lanka Muslims refuse to define LTT as a terrorist. And Eastern bombing says as some dirty business. And in February, near the Human Rights Session, I'm afraid of a provocation in Sri Lanka, organized by LTT by using the Sri Lankan Muslims, because this time they will not use, they do not ask for a provocation or a combat between the Tamils and the military, but they want to use Muslims as a Trojan horse. And for the future of Sri Lanka, for the legal senses, it's detailed another program issue. Many thanks, Dr. Nawal.
Thank you very much. A great presentation. Now, actually, I have received another 38 questions on the questions and answers, but we don't have time to answer. We will answer all the questions and by email offline. And please watch your email, and please also subscribe to our email. Otherwise, it will end up with the spam folder. Ultimate discussion about this expert panel stated that Sri Lanka in Tamil Eelam or separate state is impossible. It is not going to work. So therefore, now this is the time to the Tamil diaspora in Canada and all over the world to come together and find a solution to the ethnic question. So as example, and Shamindra Ferdinando, and clearly stated that there are some shortcomings addressing the Tamil national question. So therefore, we need to work together and find the solution for the issue. Then we can live in peace and harmony. Important factor is here, we should not allow LTTE to regroup and started the another ethnic civil war in Sri Lanka. No matter what, we have lost a lot of life, either Tamil or Sinhalese or Muslim, or that the Tamil mothers are still crying. And so then their sons and daughters, they lost, and LTTE hijacked most of them their life, and they have an opportunity to do the education. Tamils are well educated, they have a well oriented, well established culture. It is a very rich culture, and we know that. So now this is the time to consider we all together to work on reconciliation issue. And we should not allow LTT diaspora and LTT proxies, especially TGE, TGTE, and we are highly concerned about their activities, and it might trigger another civil war in Sri Lanka. So we don't want that to happen, and we will take every action to prevent this situation, protect innocent Tamils and innocent Sinhalese and innocent Muslim civilians in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, panelists. And so this is the time to conclude this event. I'm especially thankful to Daya Gamage, and he had technical issues, but he joined with us from the United States by phone. And so we were able to transcript his speech on the screen, then our listeners can follow very easily. And I am very much thankful to you, Dr. Gazel from Switzerland, to joining with us. And thank you very much for your participation. And we also, on behalf of Ontario Centre for Policy Research, I must thank you to Shamindra Ferdinando from Sri Lanka. But I know that this is the time in Sri Lanka is almost 10 o'clock, maybe, I mean 11 o'clock, but still there are a lot of people who participated. And my technical team advised me that there are individuals from 12 time zones are participating for this event. And thank you very much for everybody. And I am concluding this webinar. So you know that I'm Neville Hevich. I'm a policy analyst with the Ontario Centre for Policy Research. And we wish you all the best, and hope we will have a long-lasting peace in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for joining this webinar, and this webinar is officially concluded. Thank you.
Thank you.